Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had always known that serving in the Navy would test her limits, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment when Admiral Robert Harrison called her into his private office that cold December evening. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she stood at attention, her crisp white uniform reflecting years of discipline and dedication to her country. Sarah had earned her position through merit alone. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she was the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher who sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had. When she received her commission from the Naval Academy, tears of pride streamed down her parents' faces. She was their American dream realized, their proof that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. For 3 years, she had served with distinction aboard the USS Constellation. Her fellow officers respected her tactical mind and leadership skills. Under her command, her division had achieved the highest efficiency ratings in the fleet. She had broken barriers as one of the few female officers in her specialty, earning every promotion through excellence rather than favoritism. The Admiral's office was intimidating, filled with maritime artifacts and photographs of Harrison with various political figures. He had built his reputation as a tough but fair leader, someone who demanded the best from his officers. His weathered face told stories of decades at sea, and his chest displayed ribbons from conflicts spanning multiple decades. "Lieutenant Martinez," Admiral Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of his rank, "your service record is impressive. Very impressive indeed." He walked around his mahogany desk, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied her. "You've shown exceptional leadership qualities, and your tactical assessments have been noted at the highest levels." Sarah maintained her military bearing, though something in the Admiral's tone made her uneasy. There was a quality to his voice that seemed different from their previous interactions. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to serve." The Admiral moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "You know, Sarah. May I call you Sarah? You have tremendous potential for advancement. The Navy needs officers like you in positions of greater responsibility." His smile seemed warm, but his eyes held a calculating gleam that made her stomach tighten. "I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, Admiral," she replied, maintaining eye contact while fighting the growing discomfort in her chest. Harrison moved to the window overlooking the harbor, where ships sat anchored under the moonlight. "The path to advancement isn't always straightforward, Lieutenant. Sometimes it requires flexibility, an understanding of how things really work in our organization." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves against the pier. Sarah could feel her heart beating faster, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Something about this conversation felt wrong, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "There are certain expectations," the Admiral continued, turning back to face her. "Certain demonstrations of loyalty and commitment that go beyond what they teach at the academy." His voice had dropped to a more intimate tone, and he stepped closer once again. Sarah's training kicked in, her mind analyzing the situation like a tactical problem. Every instinct told her that this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous, somewhere that would challenge everything she believed about honor and integrity. "Admiral, I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting," she said carefully, her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. Harrison's smile widened, but it never reached his eyes. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly, Lieutenant. You're an intelligent woman. You know that careers are built on more than just performance reports and commendations." The weight of his implications settled over the room like fog rolling in from the ocean. Sarah felt her world shifting, the foundation of everything she had worked for suddenly feeling unstable beneath her feet. "I've always believed that merit should determine advancement, sir," she said, her voice carrying a slight edge that she hoped conveyed her position without being insubordinate. The Admiral chuckled, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "Merit is important, of course, but so is understanding the chain of command. So is knowing how to show proper appreciation for those who can help your career." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Though she kept her expression neutral, she thought of her parents, of their sacrifices, of their belief in the principles she had sworn to uphold. She thought of her fellow sailors, who looked up to her as an example of what was possible through hard work and dedication. "Sir, I believe my service record demonstrates my appreciation for the Navy and my commitment to excellence," she said, each word carefully chosen. Admiral Harrison's demeanor shifted subtly, his friendly facade beginning to crack. "Lieutenant, I'm going to be very clear with you. There are opportunities coming up that could fast-track your career. Positions of real influence and authority. But these opportunities require a certain understanding between us." The fluorescent light seemed to buzz louder as the silence stretched between them. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that whatever happened next would define not just her career, but her character. "What kind of understanding, Admiral?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Harrison moved behind his desk and leaned against it casually, as if they were discussing routine administrative matters. "The kind that shows you're willing to go above and beyond for those who hold your future in their hands. The kind that demonstrates you understand how loyalty really works." Sarah's mouth felt dry, but her resolve was crystallizing like ice forming on a ship's rigging. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for moments of moral testing, though she had always imagined they would come in combat situations, not in a superior officer's private office. "I serve my country and uphold my oath, Admiral. That's the extent of my loyalty," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. The Admiral's expression darkened, his mask of friendliness finally slipping away completely. "You're making a mistake, Lieutenant. A very serious mistake. In this man's Navy, those who don't play by the rules find themselves with very limited options." Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her during crisis situations. Her training had taught her to think clearly under pressure, to evaluate threats and respond appropriately. This was just another type of enemy engagement, requiring different tactics but the same courage. "Are you ordering me to do something inappropriate, Admiral?" she asked directly, her words cutting through the pretense like a blade through fog. Harrison straightened up, his face flushing with anger at her directness. "I'm offering you opportunities, Lieutenant. But perhaps you're not as smart as your record suggests." The threat was clear now, hanging in the air between them like smoke from cannon fire. Sarah realized that this moment would determine everything that came after. She could submit to corruption and compromise everything she believed in. Or she could stand firm and face whatever consequences Harrison might devise. "I think I understand the situation perfectly, Admiral," she said, her voice steady as steel. "And I think you understand my position as well." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he studied her face, looking for any sign of weakness or reconsideration. Finding none, his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "Very well, Lieutenant Martinez. I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your principles." Sarah maintained her military bearing even as her heart pounded against her ribs. She had crossed a line from which there would be no return, but she felt oddly calm about it. Some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. The Admiral moved back to his chair and sat down heavily, his demeanor shifting to one of official business. "That will be all for tonight. Lieutenant, you're dismissed." As Sarah turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the dark window overlooking the harbor. Her uniform was still crisp, her posture still proud, but something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just a naval officer following orders. She had become something more dangerous to those who would abuse their power. She was someone who could not be bought, threatened, or corrupted. And as Admiral Harrison watched her leave his office, he was already beginning to realize just how serious a threat that made her to his carefully constructed world of influence and manipulation. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but the sound echoed in the Admiral's office like the closing of a vault, sealing away any possibility of the easy victory he had expected. 3 weeks passed after that confrontational evening, and Sarah noticed the subtle changes immediately. Her duty assignments shifted to less desirable shifts, her requests for training opportunities were mysteriously delayed, and fellow officers who once sought her advice began avoiding her in the corridors. Admiral Harrison was making good on his implied threats, but Sarah remained resolute. She had always known that standing up to corruption would come with a price. Her father had taught her that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. Her mother had shown her that dignity was something no one could take away unless you surrendered it willingly. The USS Constellation was preparing for a major inspection, and Sarah threw herself into the work with renewed determination. If the Admiral wanted to play games, she would show him that her performance spoke louder than his petty retaliation. Her division worked harder than ever, and despite the administrative obstacles being placed in their path, they achieved excellence in every measured category. Commander Janet Phillips, Sarah's immediate superior, had been watching the situation develop with growing concern. A veteran officer with 20 years of service, Phillips had seen political maneuvering before, but something about this felt different. She had observed Admiral Harrison's pattern of behavior with female officers over the years, though none had ever been brave enough to file formal complaints. "Lieutenant Martinez," Phillips called as Sarah finished her evening report. "A word in my office, please." Sarah followed her commander into the small but efficiently organized space that served as Phillips' private office. The walls were covered with charts and commendations, evidence of a career built on competence and integrity. "Sarah, I know you've been facing some challenges lately," Phillips began carefully. "I want you to know that your work hasn't gone unnoticed. Despite whatever pressure you might be under, your performance has been exceptional." Sarah appreciated her commander's support, but she could see the careful way Phillips was choosing her words. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm committed to maintaining the highest standards regardless of circumstances." Phillips studied Sarah's face, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "Sometimes in our careers, we face situations that test more than just our professional abilities. They test our character and our commitment to the values we swore to uphold." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. "Enter," Phillips called, and Admiral Harrison stepped into the small office, his presence immediately dominating the space. "Commander Phillips, Lieutenant Martinez," he said with a nod that managed to be both polite and threatening. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Phillips stood at attention. "Not at all, Admiral. We were just reviewing the inspection preparations." Harrison's eyes focused on Sarah with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Excellent. That's actually why I'm here. Lieutenant Martinez, I need to speak with you privately. There's been a development regarding your career prospects." Sarah felt her stomach drop, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, Admiral." Phillips glanced between them, her expression troubled. "Admiral, if this concerns Lieutenant Martinez's performance, I should be present as her direct supervisor." Harrison's smile was cold. "This is a matter that requires privacy, Commander. I'm sure you understand." The dismissal was clear, and Phillips had no choice but to comply with the Admiral's request. "Of course, sir. Sarah, I'll be in my quarters if you need anything." The message in Phillips's words was unmistakable. She was offering support if Sarah needed it. But they both knew that in a confrontation between a lieutenant and an admiral, the power imbalance was overwhelming. Harrison waited until Phillips left before closing the door and turning his full attention to Sarah. "Lieutenant, I've been thinking about our previous conversation. I believe there may have been some misunderstanding about what I was offering." Sarah remained at attention, her training helping her maintain control despite the churning in her stomach. "Sir, I believe I understood your offer perfectly." The Admiral moved closer, his proximity making her skin crawl. "Perhaps you did. But I want to make something very clear to you, Lieutenant. Your current path leads nowhere good. Your assignments will continue to be challenging. Your advancement opportunities will become increasingly limited. Your fellow officers will begin to question your judgment and leadership ability." Each word was delivered with the precision of a tactical strike, designed to wear down her resistance through fear and isolation. Sarah realized that Harrison had likely used these same tactics on other women before her. "However," the Admiral continued, "all of that can change very quickly. One conversation, one demonstration of your willingness to be cooperative, and doors will open for you that you never imagined possible." Purported. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she channeled it into steel resolve. "Admiral, are you asking me to compromise my integrity in exchange for career advancement?" Harrison's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the predator beneath. "I'm asking you to grow up, Lieutenant. This is how the real world works. This is how successful careers are built." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Sarah thought about her oath, about the uniform she wore, about the principles that had guided her entire life. "Admiral, I need to be very clear about something," she said, her voice steady and strong. "My integrity is not for sale. Not for advancement. Not for better assignments. Not for anything you might offer." Harrison's face darkened with rage, his carefully controlled demeanor finally cracking. "You stubborn little fool. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Do you understand the kind of future you're choosing?" Sarah met his gaze directly, unafraid despite the obvious threat. "I understand perfectly, sir. I'm choosing a future I can live with." The Admiral moved behind his desk, his movements sharp with barely contained fury. When he spoke again, his voice was cold as winter wind. "Lieutenant Martinez, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to reconsider your position." He pulled out a document from his desk drawer and placed it on the surface between them. "This is a transfer order. It will remove you from this ship and place you in a position where your attitude will be less problematic for everyone involved." Sarah looked at the document but didn't reach for it. "What kind of position, Admiral?" Harrison's smile was cruel. "Supply logistics. A desk job at a remote base where your talents will be properly contained. Unless, of course, you'd like to demonstrate that you can be reasonable." The threat was clear: submit to corruption or be buried in a dead-end assignment that would effectively end her career. Sarah realized that this was the moment Harrison had been building toward, the final pressure designed to break her resistance. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her, "I would rather serve my country with honor, in any capacity, than advance through corruption." Harrison's face flushed red with anger. "Fine. You want to play hardball, Lieutenant? You want to throw away everything you've worked for because of your precious principles?" He stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward from the force. "Take off your uniform." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't believe what she had heard. "Excuse me, sir." "You heard me, Lieutenant. If you're going to act like you don't understand how this organization really works, if you're going to pretend that your precious integrity is more important than your career, then maybe you don't deserve to wear that uniform." Sarah felt something shift inside her, a crystalline moment of absolute clarity. She realized that Admiral Harrison had just made the fatal error of his career. By making his demand so explicit, so undeniably inappropriate, he had given her exactly what she needed. "Admiral," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, "are you ordering me to remove my uniform in your private office?" Harrison seemed to realize that he had crossed a line, but his anger pushed him forward. "I'm questioning whether someone with your attitude deserves the honor of wearing it." Sarah's smile was small but deadly. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed victory by an opponent's overconfidence. It was the smile of someone who realized that her enemy had just provided her with exactly the weapon she needed to destroy him. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for making your position so clear, Admiral." Harrison seemed to register the change in her demeanor, the sudden calm confidence in her voice. For the first time since their confrontation began, he looked uncertain. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. Sarah's smile widened slightly, and Admiral Harrison suddenly realized that the young lieutenant standing before him was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. That smile told him everything he needed to know about the magnitude of his mistake. "It means, sir, that you've just made this very easy for me," Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards. Admiral Harrison stared at her, and for the first time in their confrontations, he was the one who felt afraid. Admiral Harrison realized too late that he had walked into a trap of his own making. The small recording device in Sarah's uniform pocket had captured everything. His threats, his demands, his explicit abuse of power. She had started recording their conversations weeks ago, following advice from her academy roommate who now worked as a military lawyer. "Admiral," Sarah said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who held absolute power over the situation. "I want to make sure I understand your order correctly. You're commanding me to remove my uniform in your private office because you question whether I deserve to wear it?" Harrison's face went pale as he realized the implications of what he had said. "Lieutenant, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, sir," Sarah interrupted, her tone respectful but firm. "Your order was very clear, as was your reasoning. Just as clear as your previous offers of career advancement in exchange for personal favors." The Admiral's hands trembled slightly as the full weight of his situation became apparent. Years of careful manipulation and abuse of power were crashing down around him, destroyed by his own arrogance and anger. "You've been recording our conversations," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's smile remained steady. "I've been protecting myself, Admiral. Something every female officer learns to do when facing inappropriate behavior from superior officers." Harrison slumped into his chair, the fight draining out of him as he realized the extent of his exposure. "What do you want?" "Justice," Sarah replied simply, "and protection for every other woman who might face what I've faced." The next morning, Sarah walked into Commander Phillips' office with a thick folder containing transcripts, recordings, and documentation of every inappropriate interaction with Admiral Harrison. Phillips listened in stunned silence as the recordings played, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "Sarah, this is criminal behavior," Phillips said when the recordings finished. "This goes far beyond simple harassment. This is abuse of authority, attempted extortion, and sexual coercion." Sarah nodded calmly. "Yes, ma'am. I believe it also represents a pattern of behavior that has likely affected other female officers." Phillips was already reaching for her secure phone. "We need to contact Naval Criminal Investigative Service immediately. And legal counsel. This goes all the way to the top." Within hours, NCIS agents were aboard the USS Constellation. Admiral Harrison was relieved of command and escorted from the ship in handcuffs, his career and reputation destroyed in a single morning. The sight of the once powerful Admiral being led away sent shockwaves through the entire fleet. But Sarah's victory came with costs she hadn't fully anticipated. The investigation revealed that Harrison's behavior was indeed part of a pattern spanning years. 7 other women came forward with similar stories, painting a picture of systematic abuse that had been covered up and ignored by a network of officers who benefited from Harrison's influence. The scandal reached the highest levels of Navy leadership. Congressional hearings were called. Media attention focused on military culture and the treatment of women in the armed forces. Sarah found herself at the center of a national conversation about power, corruption, and courage. "Lieutenant Martinez," said Captain Rebecca Stone, who had been brought in to replace Admiral Harrison, "your courage in coming forward has exposed a cancer that had been growing in our ranks for years, but I need you to understand that this fight is far from over." Sarah stood in the same office where Harrison had tried to destroy her, but now it felt completely different. The atmosphere of menace and corruption had been replaced by one of professional respect and genuine leadership. "Ma'am, I understand that there will be challenges ahead," Sarah replied, "but some fights are worth having, regardless of the cost." Captain Stone nodded approvingly. "The other women who have come forward, they look up to you. Your refusal to be intimidated gave them the strength to speak their truth. That's real leadership, Lieutenant." The legal proceedings took months. Harrison was ultimately court-martialed and sentenced to prison for abuse of authority, conduct unbecoming an officer, and multiple counts of sexual harassment. Several other officers who had enabled or covered up his behavior faced disciplinary action or forced retirement. Sarah's role as a whistleblower made her a celebrity within military reform circles, but it also made her a target for those who preferred the old system of closed-mouth loyalty. She received death threats from anonymous sources and faced harassment from officers who viewed her as a traitor to military tradition. But she also received thousands of letters from young women considering military careers, thanking her for proving that integrity and courage could triumph over corruption and abuse. She became a symbol of positive change, evidence that the military could evolve and improve. Commander Phillips was promoted to captain and became one of Sarah's strongest advocates. What Lieutenant Martinez did, Phillips told a congressional committee, represents the very best of military values. She put service above self, truth above convenience, and justice above personal advancement. A year later, Sarah received her promotion to lieutenant commander, earned through merit and courage rather than corruption or compromise. At the ceremony, she thought about her parents, about their sacrifices, and their belief in the American dream. Her father had driven 18 hours to attend the promotion ceremony. As she stood at attention, while the new insignia were pinned to her uniform, she could see tears of pride in his weathered eyes. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," he told her afterward. "Not the easy thing, but the right thing. That's what matters." Sarah's mother embraced her tightly. "We're so proud of you. Not just for your promotion, but for who you are. For standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent." The changes that followed the Harrison scandal transformed military culture in ways both large and small. New reporting procedures were implemented to protect whistleblowers. Training programs were expanded to address harassment and abuse. A zero-tolerance policy for sexual misconduct was strictly enforced. But perhaps the most important change was harder to quantify. A shift in culture that made it clear that corruption and abuse would no longer be tolerated, no matter how powerful the perpetrator might be. Sarah continued to serve with distinction, eventually commanding her own vessel and mentoring young officers facing their own moral challenges. She never forgot the lesson of that terrible evening in Admiral Harrison's office, that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against foreign enemies, but against the corruption that can poison an organization from within. Years later, when young officers asked her about courage and integrity, she would tell them about the importance of preparation and documentation when facing powerful adversaries. But mostly, she would tell them about the power of that simple smile. The smile that told an abuser that he had made a fatal error. Admiral Harrison thought he held all the power in that room, she would explain. He thought my career, my future, everything I cared about was in his hands. But he forgot something important. The young officers would lean forward, eager to hear the lesson. He forgot that when you compromise your integrity, you lose everything that really matters. And when you refuse to compromise it, you become more powerful than those who try to corrupt you. That smile he saw was the moment I realized I had already won. Sarah's story became part of military academy curriculum, a case study in moral courage and the importance of speaking truth to power. Her uniform, the same one Harrison had ordered her to remove, was eventually donated to a military museum with a plaque that read, "Worn by Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez during her courageous stand against corruption and abuse of power." 1. But the real monument to her courage wasn't made of bronze or marble. It was in the thousands of young women who chose military careers, knowing that someone had fought to make the service a place where merit mattered more than politics, where integrity was valued over compliance, and where courage could triumph over corruption. Admiral Harrison's fatal error hadn't been demanding that she remove her uniform. His fatal error had been believing that power and fear could overcome principle and preparation. Sarah's smile had been the moment she realized that he had given her everything she needed to destroy not just his career, but the entire system of abuse he represented. In the end, the uniform stayed on. The Admiral was the one who lost everything he had worked for. And Sarah Martinez proved that sometimes, the most powerful weapon against corruption is simply the courage to stand firm and smile when your enemy makes their fatal mistake.